You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Hello and welcome to Literary Treks, TFM's local books and comic show, and I am so glad to be here. And yes, you can tell my voice is not quite the same, but I'm so glad that his voice that never changes, Casey, is with me.
Oh, my voice changes sometimes, but yes, I mentioned you before we started recording. I can't tell that well, so I mean, you still sound lovely to me.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Well, I'm excited that we're here. We are going to continue this week with our New Earth series that we've been covering with Rough Trails. Just want to tell everybody, too, thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate it. And, of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on a place like Spotify or Apple Podcasts where you can give us star ratings, or on Apple Podcasts where you can give us a review, we'd appreciate that. You can also find us online, Twitter, Trek FM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. You can also find us on Instagram at Trek FM. And then, of course, we've got the listeners-only discussion group you can join and talk to listeners from all over the world. And then, of course, we've got the website, Trek.fm, where you can see all of the shows that we're doing. We've got so much going on in here in the network. And last but not least, I do want to say to those of you that have been supporting us on Patreon, we really do appreciate it, especially like our associate producers, Greg Rozier and Casey Pettitt. So thank you so much for your hard work in making sure that these shows keep coming to you, listeners, each and every week. Now, if you want that to continue, you can, like our associate producers, go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you could be part of the team. Every little bit helps. We legitimately, though, we could use your support. So, because there's no way that we can make this happen without listeners just like you. It's been a rough couple of years for us. So please, if you have a moment, go to patreon.com/TrekFM and support us there. Casey, I'm a little disappointed because there's really not any news to talk about. Yeah, and normally I enjoy that. There's no new comic to review, which is disappointing as well. And so with that disappointment, I don't know, maybe we should hit some Rough Trails.
Let's do it.
So this book follows Belle Terre. And, of course, at the end of that book, we smashed a moon into the planet, only half of it surviving, and I wouldn't say necessarily well. And it was very interesting to me that this is really a Chekov-centered book. And, in fact, this book probably should have been titled Chekov and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, because he has a terrible day in this book.
This is like Jack Bauer meets Star Trek. Chekov does not have a good go of things. He's just trying to be a nice guy. He wants to go, have a couple beers with his friends, and it's literally all downhill for him from there. And I will say that was one of the good things about this book, I think, was how much development I feel like that they gave to Chekov, because he is essentially waiting for his transfer to become first officer of the Reliant. And it's, big career move for him. And, throughout this whole book, he is facing death with about every page turn that you get. And, but also showing that he is the right person to be a first officer of a starship. From his command decisions, which we really never got to see in the original series because he was an ensign. But even once he was in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which these stories follow, he's the kind of security or tactical officer. And so this book did a really good job of just highlighting his leadership skills, his ability to command people, and also his willingness to do whatever it takes to get the job done, even if that means potentially sacrificing himself.
Yeah, it was interesting reading the book because I was thinking about how many places that Chekov was making decisions that most likely Kirk would have made. And like you said, very much in the vein of, I'm going to do whatever it takes to do the right thing, regardless of the cost to myself. It was really, like you said, I think this might be one of the best books for this character that I've seen. And I'm glad that they did it, because I'm thinking that maybe the next book we won't have, Chekov in it anymore, the series, because he will be on the Reliant. So if there was any time to kind of give Chekov the forefront of a story, it really does feel like this was the golden opportunity to be able to do it. And I'm glad that they did, because, this is a character I think that in many ways just kind of gets shoved to the sidelines most of the time, even in the books. And of course, in the movies, I wouldn't say Chekov even really gets a ton to do. And so I was really thankful that L.A. Graff made him the forefront of this story. And this book actually really made me like the character a lot more than I had, just because of what you were seeing him do. And I just also love that, like, there was this honesty in him, when he's like, I've had a very bad day and you do not want to mess with me right now. He pulled off a lot of things and a lot of moves, again, that just really harken back to the fact that you can tell that this is a character who's spent all of that time under Kirk and has really picked up a lot of that. And I thought it was great. Yeah,
I think I like what you said there, that he spent a lot of time. I mean, he spent a lot of time trying to emulate Kirk. I mean, you can almost see in this story how throughout his career under Kirk, he has been watching and learning, and yeah, like you said, this isn't something we've ever really seen on screen from him before, and so I think the authors did a good job with putting him in those situations that he could handle and still making him. It still felt like Chekov, I guess. Nothing felt out of character for him, even though we're seeing him in situations that we've never seen before, and him taking a leadership role that we've never seen him take before. And even, I mean, from the moment with the original shuttle crash towards the beginning of the book, and him just, he's taking all that grief that the colonists are giving him, and kind of the teasing and the almost bullying, really, to really just still trying to save their lives after that ship had crashed in the lake. And then all the way to the very end of the book, where he is about to purposely crash a ship to literally save the day for everybody. And I think, yeah, that this may be one of, the best Chekov stories that we've had. Because I'm trying to think even back to, like, I think there was like a Chekov Sulu story in the Lost Years books that, if I remember correctly, was kind of so. And but yeah, this Chekov story is one that I feel like needs to be told more often.
Yeah, I know, 100% agree with that. And I wanted to ask you, what did you think about the romance section with Gwen and Chekov? Because I felt like that kind of came out of left field.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I struggled getting through this book because, to tip my hand a little bit, this wasn't my favorite book. But as far as the Chekov parts of the story were really keeping my interest. And so when that part came up, especially when they're trying to get some sleep and she's trying to get him to come to bed, I kind of had to flip back a little bit, kind of going, what did I miss? Like, where did they come together? And I think even that kind of speaks to, and I put it later in the outline, but like just how much time is being covered in this book, but also just in this New Earth series as a whole. Because I kind of got the impression that this has been weeks that they are out here together, and I hesitate to call her girlfriend, but I mean, that really was what it was. He got himself a girlfriend. But she's former Starfleet. So I think that was, one of the ways that they were able to relate to each other, and probably in this time of crisis and, whatever, like in this situation that they were in, was probably how they ended up coming together. Because you see that in TV and movies all the time, where there are these extreme circumstances and the two main characters end up together, and it's just like a little bit unrealistic. And that was kind of, I guess, the part of the Chekov story here that I was just kind of like not as thrilled with. But it did add some tension towards the end, again, when he's about to sacrifice himself in the shuttle at the end. And she basically shoves him in the cargo crate to save his life, to sacrifice herself, which ended up, she didn't sacrifice herself anyway, and they ended up having to break up. But so, I mean, it was kind of this weird thing that I don't feel like it was necessarily shoved in, but I do feel like it kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it doesn't have a lot of resonance in the story, because it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
There isn't anything that it doesn't add anything to the story, which I think is really strange. And you would expect it to. You would expect this. Chekov does mention that he might come and back to this planet and retire. And yet, and Gwen is, happy to hear that.
Yeah.
But I feel like it would have been more interesting for the romance, if you're going to add it in, to actually have it mean something to Chekov. Where it's something that changes his character in some way. It has some impact. Whereas here, I just don't see it really having any impact on him as a person. It just seems like a thing that happens, and I wish that had been done better.
Yeah, it's almost like he took another page out of Kirk's book and had his romance of the week or something. And I mean, it almost would have been good if she was somebody who worked on the orbital platform with him, and maybe was just kind of, they were already getting to know together. Maybe the romance blossomed as they went through this whole story together, rather than kind of meeting in the middle of the tragedy and something happening there. I don't know. It's just, and I agree. I feel like almost like if she would have almost been the impetus of him growing up, I guess, for lack of a better term, between even Star Trek the Motion Picture and Star Trek 2. So yeah, I feel like it's one of those things that probably could have been lifted out of the story and wouldn't have made a huge amount of difference there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think it's one of those things where it just kind of feels thrown in.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't feel as much a part of the story as you would want it to, which I think is really important. But I think I'm not going to ding it too much. You know, it does, like you said, I think it feels classic Star Trek in the sense of like what people think Kirk did every episode.
Right.
So, even though that's not true.
Right.
One of the things that this book, I think, really does is that obviously these colonists are in a horrible way because of everything that's happened to this planet. And this idea of like barbarians at the gate. And Gwen actually says something really, really interesting where she says, I really hate people sometimes. I hate knowing that we can go from a civilized Federation citizens to selfish barbarians in 6 months of setting foot on a new planet. And then Chekov is thinking, he says in his own mind, but I can understand a little better than I used to how easily barbarism can sneak up on you when you feel like you've lost all other options. And this was a really interesting part of the book because I think what it does is it's the same question that we kind of get in DS9 with Paradise Lost. When you strip away this veneer of society, what's left? And this book is really showing that, for some people, there isn't a lot left other than self-preservation.
Yeah, and I have to echo her sentiment. Like, I really do hate people sometimes. And, and I do think, I think that the book kind of takes a bit of an extreme view of that between the different groups of people that we see. Because, within 6 months, that seems really fast to me to have all of the people come together to do what they can to preserve as much of the planet as they can in the previous book with the Quake Moon crashing into it, or crashing another moon into the Quake Moon. But it seems like they went from idealistic, independent colonists to barbarians very quickly. We've already got like abandoned towns, and we've got, within 6 months, we've already come up with all these cheeky nicknames for all of the towns and locations on the planet and everything. And so to me, the story kind of felt like it kind of rushed the colonists into that to be able to tell this story. But at the same time, I feel like it's kind of done a very Star Trek thing by kind of analogizing, or making, I guess, an allegory to real life by saying, when we're left to our own devices and we're in terrible circumstances, people will resort to whatever means necessary that they can to survive and get ahead. And one of the characters that I feel like was not responsible necessarily, but sure didn't help was Governor Sedlak, who was the governor of this area, who really took a hands-off approach to everything. He took a very logical, like, we're only going to step in where we logically can succeed. And so he was unwilling to risk resources on rescue operations. There was almost an element of, dare I say, fake news of, saying that the reports of the flooding were just rumors, and that there's just a little bit of light flooding. And, they even acknowledge in the book that Sedlak wasn't necessarily a bad governor because he was taking such a logical approach, but he wasn't taking a very human approach to this human colony. And so, I feel like it's just another way of just showing that if we don't work together, we're basically going to be working against each other. If you're not for us, you're against us, kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up about the governor, because I also found that interesting. this and what I think it kind of showed is, for me, that was one of those places where I really saw it's almost like the ultra Vulcan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if we can't help, is it logical to even try?
Right.
And but I found that to be something that was their way, or at least this governor's way of, I think what I found, it was like this governor's excuse for not doing anything.
Mm.
Like he was just using it as an excuse. And I found that really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, because it did seem to be, you know, it sounds logical and good, but really it's an easy way to get past, like, having to do anything.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you know, the fact that this is something I was really struck by. You know, I think whatever your core principles are really going to come into play when you're pushed to the brink. And you know, these people came here, they wanted to be free of the shackles of somebody being there for them, and that also, it seems to me that they brought a lot of people with them that don't necessarily have the best intentions for being there, and it does turn them into these barbarians.
I mean, they were pushed into an extreme circumstance that they obviously weren't expecting. And I just wonder with some of these people, and we had that one character in the first book, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the one that was kind of Kirk's thorn in his side and had a criminal record and everything. And I got the impression that other people in this colony were ones who maybe had a little bit of a sullied past. And it makes me wonder if the whole issue with the Quake Moon hadn't happened and this world had been the paradise that they all thought it would be, what would this world have looked like? What would the people have looked like? Would these people with the troubled pasts have come together for the greater good of the colonies rather than for their own gain? Again, without knowing anything about the Illuvium or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, this Governor Sedlak maybe still would have been elected governor of this area, and maybe it wouldn't have been so bad that he took the more logical, hands-off approach. And we had a captain in that first book, too, that was kind of the don't bother me unless it's an emergency kind of guy. And that's almost
right.
What this governor seems like, too, is just like somebody who wanted to get away from the life that they had before and start something new. And, you know, here Sedlak's kind of you can almost hear him rolling his eyes going, I just don't want to deal with it. You know, if people came out, they knew what the risks were. They have to deal with that kind of natural selection kind of thinking.
Yes. Well, I wanted to ask you this because to me, this was interesting. There's very few times in a original series era book, even movie era, where we don't get the big three. So this book is really about Sulu, Uhura, and Chekov. And you get some Scotty every once in a while. You get some Rand, but how did that work for you? Do you feel like this book did a good job of, you know, utilizing the characters well enough so that you didn't miss, you know, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy?
I think that it actually worked in this book's favor to have the Enterprise with the big three. kind of out of the picture, because it really forced these characters to basically rely on their training and rely, kind of like we talked about earlier with Chekov, on everything that they've learned from Kirk and really even in Spock. And I would say that if Chekov had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, Sulu and Uhura weren't very far behind him on that.
Yeah.
The things, it's just one of those. It's one of those stories that you just think when things couldn't possibly get any worse, they do. And I would say in about the first half of the book, I wasn't real thrilled, I guess, with how the story was progressing, because it moved pretty slow in the first half of the book, with Sulu and Uhura trying to find Chekov, and then at various points getting split from each other, and then Sulu meets up with Chekov, and Uhura's kind of on her own, like, in the later half of the book. And I actually really liked how things kept getting switched up, because we actually got to really see Sulu and Uhura working together. We got to see Sulu and Chekov working together. We got to see Uhura really being a good leader in her own right, between working with Rand on this communications project, but also even with the other people that she was coming in contact with as well. And so just to get to see these characters really in their own light and doing what they do best, I thought was really good. I feel like this isn't a very long book, but we probably could have cut out some of the Sulu and Uhura stuff. Just because, like I said, I felt like it dragged a little at the beginning as they were searching like every town and coming into contact with some horrible situation each place they went. It was starting to kind of just drag on a little bit, but even still, though, I think that their story highlighted their strengths, and not to the extent that it did for Chekov, but it just gave us a good story where we're not just constantly waiting for, the Deus Ex Machina that is Kirk or Spock or the Enterprise, for that matter.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of what you just said, and I honestly don't feel like I could add anything to it, because I think you rightly pinpointed all the good parts about it and a few of the weaknesses with these three characters. But I think I was really grateful that we actually just got enough. We spent a lot of time with these three characters, and I think, like you said perfectly, it is great that the Enterprise isn't there to just show up and save the day. It's down to them to use their training to figure it out. And I also like that we found out that it wasn't because they weren't doing things right for communications. It's because they were being jammed. They were being blocked. Yeah. They were, these peacemakers had been foiling all the work that they had been doing. And so I think that really worked as well to me. So again, you really just saw how brilliant these people are who work on the Enterprise that aren't the top three. And I think that was really cool. We just don't get a lot of opportunities to have that in a story. So to get it here was pretty great.
It's funny too, because with Nichelle Nichols always talk about how tired she got of saying hailing frequencies open. Yet half this book she's just hailing Sulu the whole time, trying to get this communications thing to work. But she's so tenacious in this, and even before discovering that they're jammed, and then she had the wherewithal to basically make sure that she always had this equipment with her so she could continue trying and finding the right place, especially once they realize, well, if they get up above the storms and the clouds and everything, they can send a message to the control station or whatever to get a message about the flooding that was going to happen. And so, she never gave up on this thing. She knew that it should work, and, never let a little problem get in her way of continuing to try to fix it.
One of the storylines here that I thought was really interesting is the choice of a hard life, and that the colonists had actually come here on purpose because they wanted a more challenging life, and I think it was really interesting because somebody is talking to Chekov in there saying, you've got to remember one thing, Commander, is that willingness to take on risk isn't the same as preparedness. And I think we've been talking about that a lot with this series because they were clearly not ready for all that they were going to face. And I think these people are finally learning what it means to live without a safety net. And to me, that's just really, really interesting to see these people, not want to live on the utopia that is Earth at this point. And to me, that's just a really fascinating choice. And I think a really challenging idea then for Star Trek itself. That there would be people that wouldn't want that.
Well, not actually. Yeah, I guess that kind of speaks even to just the human condition of adventure and exploration, which Star Trek is so good about talking about. And, even as you're talking there, it kind of made me think back on those first couple books where, we've gotten a little confused on how, these folks wanted to come to this planet, get away from the utopia of Earth and the safety of the Federation to turn around and basically apply for Federation membership. But just, I guess what this kind of, and even this statement that you read from, whoever it was is that Gwen that said that?
I think this actually is Gwen that says this, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the fact that they're talking about living without a safety net, like, just because they might be members of the Federation at some point doesn't mean the Federation is going to swoop in and save them all the time. Like, they are purposely trying to figure things out on their own, to a fault sometimes, where they are, trying to be a little too independent. When at the beginning of the book, Chekov is just trying to earn his shuttle ride by helping drop off some supplies to the different colony sites, and they're just giving him a hard time. And I think that from the colonists' point of view, if they really do want to do this on their own, it probably is hard for them to constantly have Starfleet people around that probably know the better way to do these things or whatever, when they're just trying to make their own lives, make their own mistakes, and, get by and really create a colony that's theirs, that's not a Starfleet colony, that's not even necessarily a Federation colony per se. It's just their colony, their planet. And I feel like you can kind of respect that a little bit as far as wanting to take on this challenge, because, I think to the movie WALL-E from Pixar, where the humans have gotten so lazy in their utopia that they're literally just sitting in chairs being fed, watching TV and movies or whatever. And these people are like, yeah, that's not good enough for us. We want to be out there working with our hands and making a life for ourselves that we can be proud of.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And especially, I think, using like the idea of WALL-E as an example. And I think the thing that I was really struck by, and what is strange to me in a lot of ways, is that you just wouldn't have been more prepared. Apparently none of them were Boy Scouts, which is probably a detriment to them. And I think it's really interesting that we have this perspective. And I think it's also something that connects with the fact that with things being more difficult than they anticipated, it's exactly what leads to the conversation we were having earlier with, the barbarians at the gate idea. And the two things really kind of go hand in hand, because these colonists weren't truly prepared, I think, for what may come at them. And in all honesty, I mean, nobody, I think, would have been truly prepared for what's happened to this planet. I don't know if anybody had that in their mind, that this was going to be the planet that they were going to have. One that had been devastated, and they only can live on half of it. Which does kind of make me wonder, too. It does seem like the way it was described sounded like hell on earth. So I don't know if I would want to stay here.
Yeah, I think if I was one of these colonists, I would be saying, you know what, that was my bad. I want to be on the next ship back to Earth. Send me up into
my
space.
Bad.
Yeah.
No, I 100% agree with you. I just feel like, because the cover of the book doesn't make it seem like it's so bad. Mm-hmm. But then the way it's described, it sounds like a hellscape.
Yeah. I mean, the cover of the book makes it look beautiful. And the whole time reading this book of the sandstorms or the alluvium storms that are like, it's literal radiation. It's burning their skin. They're breathing it in. They're swallowing it. It's getting in their body. Yeah, they're making things like medicine and other advancements from the alluvium, but I think in its raw form, I mean, nobody wants to be breathing that in. And what I actually pictured the whole time, I guess, as I read it, was the opening scenes from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, when we see Khan for the first time, when they're coming in and they're all Khan and all of his people are dressed up. They've got masks on, because it's so sandstormy outside. That's actually what Khan was wearing in that scene was what I was picturing a lot of them wearing, with their dust mufflers and their robes and everything. So, and at one point I kind of had to remember that this is like right before Star Trek II, like within a year or so before that. So it's not like they gave all of this type of equipment, because obviously they didn't even know that Ceti Alpha V had, turned into that kind of thing. But I mean, it made it actually pretty easy to picture what was going on, and easy to realize that, I don't want anything to do with being there. And then add on top of that all of the issues that they've got between the Carsons, who actually turn out to be good people. They're trying to protect the environment as best as they can. They're environmentalists almost, or ecologists or something. But then the peacemakers and these armed bandits, basically, that are creating even more hell on this hell on earth. From between the illegal alluvium mining that they're doing, which we find out, is kind of the whole issue with everything that's going on. They're actually trying to cause floods. But really, these are the desperate people. These are the ones who really kind of turned into barbarians, because this was not the trip they signed up for. And so now they are kind of doing whatever they can to get as much money, alluvium really, as they can to get off the planet and go make a better life for themselves somewhere else.
No, the idea of this power and profit and this using this illegal alluvium mining to get out of this, because, like you said, these people who had signed up to be there to kind of help with this, to protect, they feel cheated. Mm-hmm. They feel like that, again, this literally isn't what we signed up for, because, we had it in our contracts, the amount of hours we should work and all this stuff. And now we're doing so much more. And what was fascinating to me about this whole thing is just that they become so barbaric that they are legitimately willing to destroy almost a whole civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's insane to me that they've fallen this far.
Yeah, and I appreciate too at the end of the book, the one good thing I guess that comes out of it is this floodplain, which the peacemakers were kind of saying, like, whose dumb idea was it? Like, we've told them not to build settlements in this floodplain. Like, it was just a matter of time. And they even were able to calculate it was going to be a long time, but like, why would they create their settlements in a literal floodplain? And so after, the events of this story, I think it was Sedlak was like, oh yeah, the most logical solution is to not, build settlements there anymore.
Right.
It's like, well, yeah, no, it's flooded. Of course you don't want to do that. But the extent that they went to do this, it was just, I want to say unconscionable. But again, I guess I go back to the fact that some of these settlers, these colonists, were people who were trying to find a different life for themselves. And some of them may have come from troubled pasts to begin with. And I feel like these potentially could be, I don't want to like cast judgment on them, but some of them seem like they could be people who would have maybe done this anyway on another planet. And maybe this is something that they can do well because they have done it before. But it could also just be people who are at their wits' end with the way things are and, are just want so desperately for a better life that they're willing to basically do these, mass murder all these settlers and just try to justify it by saying, well, they shouldn't have built their homes there. And, and then flying off to who knows where to settle on a different planet or, and I know that there's even thoughts, well, were they being, were they working with the Called or the Blood or the Klingons or the Romulans or, whoever it was, like, and it was really just, these are desperate people in desperate times and, kind of taking drastic measures to get what they feel like they need to do something else. And, like I see this and I'm like, well, if the colony stays here, there's, the peacemakers are maybe gone now at the end of this book, but somebody else is probably just going to rise up in their place. We've seen how things kind of ebb and flow on Earth. It's going to be the same there too. Like there might be some periods of relative peace and everyone kind of coming together for the greater good. But from the beginning of this book, we saw that the actual weather patterns on this planet were like this story took place during the sandstorm season or whatever. And I think there was like a rainy season that was going to be coming at some point because when they destroyed the Quake Moon, it really messed up like all the weather patterns on this side of the planet. So, I kind of just wonder what's going to happen next, next year when there's another bad weather season, like who's going to be rising up to do bad then.
This whole thing was pretty fascinating to me. And I think, one of the things that it did a good job of it's just talking to human nature, and we saw the good, the bad, and the ugly of human nature in this book, especially when pushed to the brink. And that human nature without any, guiding principles comes to ruin. We're willing to kill each other if we think that's going to be good for us. And so I think that this book really pushed to the brink, and Chris and I say this on the Orb all the time about Deep Space Nine, but it's about challenging the idea of Star Trek. It's about challenging the ideals of the Federation when push comes to shove. In the same way, we saw with Deep Space Nine with the war and all of those type of things. And I think this book is doing the same thing, except that these aren't Starfleet officers we're watching. These are just previous Federation members, citizens. And, they don't hold to the same things that, our Starfleet officers are required to by their oath. And I think we see in this book what happens when they don't. It could be terrifying. And so, yeah, I'm really interested, Casey, through talking about this. What would you rate Rough Trails?
I struggled to come up with a rating on this because I had a rough time reading Rough Trails. It was a slower burn for me. I gave it a 2 on Goodreads, more because I felt like it was, I'd say 2.5 communications frequencies that Uhura is trying. After our discussion today, though, I actually could feel my rating going back up, because as I read this book, I wanted so bad to really just love it and be diving into it. But part of my brain was just kind of going back to I don't know how long this is taking. I don't know. How do we already have abandoned settlements here? How long has passed since they've been here? And that's one of the things I liked, even in the previous book, Belle Terre, was the countdown kind of nature of the book. So you really got a good feel for the time that was passing. And I wish this one had something like that, because it made it feel like this book took place over 2 days, but when you really come down to it, I think this book probably took place over weeks. And then obviously there's a 6-week gap between the last 2 chapters, with the last chapter really being more of an epilogue, kind of a teaser really for the next book. But I'd say for now I'll settle on my 2.5 rating, with a potential future read going up. But yeah. What about you? How did you come in?
I came down at a 3, and because I can't discount anything that you said, but I think I responded a little bit better to the book really taking seriously what they had done to this place in the previous book, and more of, I think, a realistic take on what it would look like. And yeah, it was a tough book to read, but I also feel like, I don't know if you've seen 1883, but, pioneers making their way across the prairie was a horrendous and terrible journey. People died all the time.
Yeah.
Terrible things were happening. So, this felt very realistic, and I think sometimes the reason people might not respond to this book is the realism in it, which is, they don't really take a shortcut or give it any kind of easy button for this, which it can be frustrating because we're kind of used to an easy button in Star Trek. So, but it's not as good as Belle Terre was. And it's a little bit better, I think, than the first book, but not by much. And so, hoping that the series will continue to kind of grow and get better as we move on into that 4th book.
Well, we are halfway through the New Earth series. Last time we finished the 24th century books, and next time I'm actually really excited because we are going to be revisiting Enterprise. Not even Star Trek Enterprise, but Enterprise. So I'm looking forward to getting into our next adventure there.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited about that as well. I have not read many of the early Enterprise books, and so I figured it was time for us to kind of go back and do that, and I can't wait for us to get to that. But Casey, before we do, if people want to catch up with you, where are the other places that they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Goodreads, Letterboxd, Twitter, and Instagram at Knitting Trekkie. You can find me on Facebook in the Babel Conference, and you can find me on a podcast called Mickey's Marvels, where we talk about everything under the Disney umbrella.
And of course, you can find me all over the place under social media. I'm MattRushing02. You can also find me here on the network doing a bunch of shows: The Orb, Warp 5, Artificial Tango, and Saddle Up. So Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise, The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Saddle Up. Of course, we are going to be diving into Strange New Worlds, which very excited to do that. Oh, and The Artificial Tango is about Star Trek Picard, and we're wrapping up Season 2, which I can't believe, and I'm not ready for it. No. I'm not ready for it, but I'm kind of ready for it at the same time, so I can't wait. And of course, you can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network with 2 shows. Did Outpost with Drea Kaufman, where we talked about Harry Potter each and every week, 1 chapter at a time, and that is a completed show, so hope you'll enjoy that. And then Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars. But of course, as always, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
You call that light reading? To each his own, number one.